welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started and just trying to keeping the flow going. Thank you for joining this morning. My name is Staci Horwitz. I'm with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We are here to talk about developer partnerships. I just wanted to provide a little context, and I know this is hard to see, but so some of you were on the bus tour for the City of Lakes Community Land Trust yesterday, and I'm not going to dive too deeply, but I think it's helpful to understand the perspective, especially because the Land Trust has partnered closely with Habitat over a few different projects, and we've had a growing partnership with the City of Minneapolis. And so I thought it might be helpful to set a little bit of a stage as to how that has come about. And when you're thinking about those new partnerships and developing that, and then we'll get into some prompt questions I have, but it really is meant to be most of this morning a discussion amongst all of us to share our knowledge and hopefully walk away with a few little tidbits that you can use in your communities. So one of the things about the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, when we started, we did not start developing properties. We started working with developer partners from the beginning. So we chose not to step into vacant rehabs. We chose not to do new construction. We really looked at partnerships, and the first 4 townhomes that came into the Land Trust were through a partnership with Hope Community. And throughout the years, those partnerships have resulted in single-family homes, townhomes, and condominiums. But what was helpful in those early days was it gave the organization an opportunity to get units into the Land Trust without a ton of financial risk and without, frankly, a lot of capacity. There was one person for about a year or so, and then 2, and then it was 2 of us for, I don't know, a good 4 or 5 years, and then we added a part-time. So when you think about trying to develop, the capacity, both financially and from a staff perspective, wasn't necessarily there. But at the same time, we had units coming into the Land Trust. And so it helped us to demonstrate that the model works, that we can make this work, but that we didn't necessarily need to be the one that was trying to figure out how to build or do the vacant rehabs. The buyer-driven program was the other element that brought a lot of the units into the organization initially. Some of those early investments, I was thinking back through this, and the affordable homeownership perpetual program through the city many years ago was one of the funders in our buyer-driven program. And that was really focused on rehab dollars. Those were CDBG funds. And it was one of the early ways that we partnered with the City of Minneapolis in particular, along with some of the developer partnerships. So really local funding that came through the city and the county. So we may have partnered with Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, another private developer. They may have been doing a market rate development, but wanted some affordable units or were required to have some affordable units. So we became very popular because we could steward the affordability long term that often came with the public funding investment. So in some of those early condominium developments, in some of the townhomes, there are city and county investments primarily on the affordable side. And for the most part, I think those were local versus like a federal pass-through dollar. So there was some early programs. What you see over time is you see this increasing investment. So a lot of arm wrestling with the city, a lot of hard conversations, a lot of stretching, and Roxanne and I are smiling at each other because I think we have a really great partnership with city, county, our state funders, our developer partners, but that doesn't mean you don't disagree. It doesn't mean you don't have hard conversations. And as I always say, a great partnership is the fact that you can go toe-to-toe in a conversation, but you walk away still respecting one another. And I think that's what really has helped to grow a strong developer partnership. To the point now where we have home funding, significant investment by the city this past year for those who were on the tour yesterday in the condominium project that we're doing, the 7 condos. That didn't happen overnight. So when you think about, especially as you're journeying into this realm of community land trust and shared equity, is that it is about that consistency and continuing to push the envelope and continuing to move things forward. It's not going to happen overnight. It may be one partnership in one single family home, but guess what? That's one home you didn't have yesterday, right? And how do you leverage what you do well as an organization and what maybe a developer partner does well? I think a classic example is Harrison Townhomes. You know, that opportunity kind of came to the land trust. We had to be candid to say we don't have the capacity to build a 17-unit townhome from a straight developer lens. We have the capacity to steward those units long-term and keep them affordable, but it's, you know, there's 7 of us compared to how many at Habitat? 150. So, you know, being a little wise in that moment instead of stubborn, it was to say, you know what, this is really a beneficial project for the community, so how do we make it happen, and how do we make it happen with a longtime partner and one that we have trust and relationship with. Often we were, there was a great question that was asked yesterday when it talked about partnering, and Alvin, bless his heart, tactfully asked if we're ever asked to bail out developers versus actually having a partnership from the beginning. And so most of the time, it's a partnership from the beginning. We're going in eyes wide open. We know what each other's roles are. We know we're going to do some joint fundraising. The land trust is going to be responsible for those affordability investments long term. That's very different than someone coming after a project is built and asking us to try to backfill on affordability, which has happened from time to time. And I think you need to be open to that. But a true partnership is that conversation from day one to say, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. We really need affordability. How do we jointly fundraise? And there might be situations where maybe we're not fundraising and it will just become a land trust unit. But those are how that's the importance of setting those parameters and those expectations early on. Yeah, project by project, yep. And so then, I think I only have a couple more. So our current investments, we do still have some CDBG. We have home funds coming through. Did I spell that right? ARPA? Yeah. The American Recovery Plan Act, that's really what has funded our condominiums. And then the stabilization funding, which I touched on a little bit in the buyer-driven, which is funding that the city has brought forward in the last 1.5 years or 2 years to help with renter stabilization and with homeowner stabilization, which if you're thinking about possibly attending a session this afternoon, we'll talk about that a little bit in the homeowner assisted program. And we now have, bless the city's heart, the city decided we needed yet another perpetual affordable homeownership program in the city of Minneapolis. And long story, won't go into it because I really want us to get into discussion, but there is a different way to keep the homes affordable through the Minneapolis Homes program. And it is a deed-restricted 2.5% compounded annually fixed depreciation. And the reason I add that to it is because will be an administrator of that program on behalf of the city. And so we will have developers having homes come into the land trust through the Perpetual Affordable Homeownership Initiative. And to touch on a couple of these, I've already kind of done that in conversation, is we have the Harrison Townhomes with Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, 17 townhomes just north of downtown, kind of, well, east, it's more west of downtown. I do know directions, but it's near my office, which is near north, but west of downtown. 628 is, we partnered with Hope Community, which is the entity that we did some of our original first units with. We also have a single family home where we have done in partnership with them, as well as the last 2 years we've done a home ownership cohort. So they're working with renters and other community residents in their neighborhood. We're working with them to bring some affordability for individuals and families looking to purchase duplexes. So there's a lot of different ways you can figure out how to partner. But the 628 is a 7 condo. It's the longest vacant residential building in the city of Minneapolis. It's been vacant for at least 30 years, but it will have new homeowners here in the next couple months. And the Minneapolis Homes Program, which is the funding, kind of the key mechanism of funding through the city right now, is funding a lot of the development in the city of Minneapolis, and some of those homes, as I mentioned, will come in through either straight land trust homes, meaning that once they're developed and sold, they will be a land trust home, or they'll be part of the city's perpetual affordable homeownership program that we will administer. So those are just some of the pictures. The one to your left is the building, the the 628, built in 1904. To the right is a condo project that was done several years ago, as well as the one lower left-hand corner, and that's a schematic of the lower right-hand corner is the Harrison townhomes that were currently in progress with Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity. So with that, let's kick off questions. And I'm going to start with one for Roxanne and Chad. And if each of you would share an example of how you partner with communities, developers, or other organizations.
So hi everyone, I'm Roxanne with the City of Minneapolis. Staci stole a lot of my thunder and talked about a lot of the things I was going to
Sorry. Yeah.
But I'll say the way that we've partnered with City of Lakes Community Land Trust has really changed and shifted substantively since 2019. In 2019, we did a study in partnership with Grounded Solutions Network. See you here. And the outcome of that study was really focusing our homeownership programs so that we're trying to very consciously reach home buyers below 80% of area median income, and we're trying to center home buyers that are between 40% and 60% of area median income in all of our programming. And one of the key reasons why we made that policy shift, historically, our programs went up to 115% AMI. We really sort of looked consciously at what would it take to eliminate racial disparities in homeownership in our city. And that analysis made it very clear, if we want to eliminate racial disparities in homeownership in our city, we must focus below 60% AMI because 70% of the BIPOC renters in our city have incomes at that income level. So making that conscious decision to shift also meant really doubling down on our partnership with City of Lakes Community Land Trust and doubling down and expanding to try and make it so that we can be open to many different types of perpetual affordable housing models. We created our own city model. We're currently working with 2 different limited equity cooperatives that are doing yet another model, and we're part of a consortium with the Minnesota, the
Metropolitan
yes,
Consortium of Community Developers.
What's the M?
Yeah.
With the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers to try to make it so that there's a better basis in the state of Minnesota for limited equity cooperatives. We're trying to look at some technical assistance partnerships and share partnerships for cooperatives moving forward. And one of the key things that changed in 2020 when we made this shift was effectively we're getting in the middle now of all of the partnerships that happen with perpetual affordable housing projects in the city. We have a contract with City of Lakes Community Land Trust that sort of outlines, here's what we're expecting from you as the administrator of perpetually affordable homes in our city. And we set expectations with developers and frame in our contract with developers, here is your selected perpetual affordable housing compliance monitor. I think that's the term that we use. Here's your compliance monitor that you're going to work with, and here's what we're expecting of you when you're working in partnership with this organization. Before 2020, we really kind of just relied on CLT to talk to whoever wanted to do perpetual affordable projects. And Staci may disagree, but there were times when there were challenges with people not understanding what what their roles were or not following through. And so we're really trying to bolster that relationship and bolster setting expectations with developers, in part to make it so that perpetually affordable housing is more accessible to all types of developers to participate in. We want to work not only with nonprofit developers, but also with for-profit developers, also with community-based developers. We want to be as open and as accessible to everyone working with us and everyone working towards the goal of achieving affordable homeownership. I'll pause there and let
Alright.
Chad talk for a bit.
Sure. So again, I'm Land Development Director at Habitat for Humanity, supported in Twin Cities, supported by lots of other experts from our organization here. In particular, Jessica and Noah, who are managing our relationships with a couple of other cities where we were doing land trust activity. So I'm gonna rely on them for some of this. There were a few things I just wanted to toss out there before I got specific, which is, if you know one Habitat for Humanity, you know one Habitat for Humanity. Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity is a very mature, large organization, $46 million budget, and so we are not like most of the Habitat affiliates that you are gonna encounter. But Habitat arose at the same time as this community land trust concept was arising. Our roots are in Georgia, just like I believe land trust roots are.
Yep.
And the original language around Habitat was some of that very similar language. And so Habitat has kind of diverged from the land trust concept and the permanent affordability concept. But we at Twin Cities are very much veering back into that vein as our public funders are looking, as they are making massive investments in these houses, are looking to see those units stay affordable in perpetuity. And so we're shifting more to the permanent affordability, shared equity side of the coin, rather than maybe that individual family wealth creation opposite side of the coin these days. Yes, we're trying to limit it to an example or two. We have so many, but I'll just give a broad overview and not get into the details. So we're partnering with the City of Lakes, obviously, the city. We have done land trust units funded by the City of St. Paul. We're currently working in partnership with Rondo Community Land Trust in Shoreview, talking with them about land trust units that we're already creating in partnership with the City of Roseville, a first-ring suburb where we have not done anything in many years prior to this land trust program. Partnering with the City of Edina, perhaps our most affluent suburb, to rehab there and put those into land trust with Homes Within Reach. So many of our city relationships are really a tri-party relationship with the land trust that's active in that area. We do and have land trusted internally at Habitat, a number of units, mostly in Anoka County and a little bit in Dakota County where there are not active land trust entities. And everywhere else, our position now is, if we're doing perpetual affordability, and the city or whoever wants land trust to achieve that, then we'll partner with that land trust, even though we could do it ourselves. So one other thing that I should have mentioned before, the big picture ideas, is that even though many habitats, and Twin Cities Habitat in particular, haven't been land trusts per se, we have had a buyback provision and shared equity in our mortgage for 28 years or 25 years, and 99% of the time we buy back houses. They have to be offered to us first and we buy it back, fix them up and resell them in our program. So we are kind of operating to achieve perpetual affordability, just not through a ground lease land trust mechanism.
So with the habitat approach you mentioned, like you're moving kind of away from an individual well-built approach, and I'm just curious, like, was there one event as a huge long-standing organization that really changed your mindset on CLTs, or was it economic conditions? What, I guess, convinces your organization to be partnering?
Yeah. Well, it's been an evolution. Our first land trust partnership deal was with City of Lakes. Was a 5-unit townhome building within a 28-unit project, I think it
Yeah.
was.
Franklin Station.
Franklin Station. It kind of came about because the deal on that building was originally started with Public Housing Authority, I believe, and that fell apart, and we kind of stepped in to take the place of the Public Housing Authority to build those units. Then there was a long hiatus, and then in the recovery from the 2008 recession, home prices were escalating in 1 year, and the home sale price limit, which HUD establishes, looks back at the previous year's prices. So the previous year's prices were very depressed, prices rose high. Our houses started to exceed the home sale price limit, and a way to keep those funds and meet that requirement is to land trust, because you can just compare the land trust price against that sale price limit. So we did a number of units in Anoka County where there's not another land trust entity, just simply to keep home funds in the deals. That kind of opened the door again, and so when Hennepin County became much more selective towards permanent affordability in their funding rounds, we were able to keep those funds, get those funds by committing to permanent affordability and land trusting. A lot of those we did internally, even though Homes Within Reach was also operating in Hennepin County. And then I think the big trigger was the Harrison Townhomes, which was not just to get money or to, fulfill some of the minutia of funding requirements, but a land trust came to us with a deal that we wouldn't otherwise have gotten. They brought funding that we wouldn't have otherwise have gotten, specifically housing infrastructure bonds from Minnesota Housing. And even though Staci can't remember where her office is, the project is like 3 blocks from their office, so they have that strong connection to the neighborhood. We built houses there before, but we just didn't have a strong connection there. So there's some synergies there that kind of made our eyes wide open, opened the door, where Habitat, as a pretty cost-effective builder with development experience, can fit a niche with our land trust partners to bring some cost efficiencies and some scale and make some deals happen that either wouldn't come to Habitat or the land trust could.
Other thoughts, questions?
Did you have any challenges or disagreements internally in terms of the philosophy of Habitat?
There's been a few of those.
I was laughing because the table over here is like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, partnership is just a long way of saying pain.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? I love partnerships, but it just means you're signing up for lots of talking, both externally and internally. So yeah, we have had a long, so I don't mean to take credit and the blame for getting us into a lot of these deals, which have raised the issues for us, especially in terms of getting them sold. And so we're in the midst of a strategic plan. During that strategic planning process, the question was raised, what is our position vis-a-vis land trusting and permanent affordability? And so that was identified as something we need to answer in this strategic planning period. And so we're just coming out of and into the implementation phase of a deep dive, many meetings internally and with external stakeholders about where do we really want to be positioned, and not just tactically, but strategically, philosophically. Because it is different. Our clients are not coming to us because they're thrilled with the land trust idea, or that they even have heard of a land trust before. And then we have these internal marketing mechanisms and all this kind of very habitat specific stuff that kind of then when the land trust concept and the reality of the land trust is presented to a buyer, it can be hard for them to digest. And we have lost some buyers because of that. So we have to change how we educate people, how we market people, how we record, whether it's different docs, kinds of different docs. And then we're also, when we're in a position where we're joint marketing with a land trust, and we hope that they can generate buyers, we can generate buyers, and the land trust is taking on that stewardship, so they want all the qualification information, rightly so, especially if they're the ones that have some of the funds come directly to them. So you have to merge these application processes. That's a challenge. Especially when you're dealing with a monster habitat like us, where we have these we have systems, very rigid systems. A little habitat probably is a little more flexible.
And I think it's also, you know, and we've had this conversation around Harrison, and I think I get a little spirited sometimes, but it's wanting to make sure that however the buyer's coming to the project or to the townhome or whatever is in that partnership, it's how do you kind of respect both sides, right? It's respecting what is existing in habitat, and yet we may have buyers coming through here on the land trust. They may go through the income qualification, they may go through all these steps, and is there a way to merge that into Habitat's process without having somebody start over, right? So you're trying to streamline, but and I think making sure that even when you do have some of those spirited conversations, that it's an understanding it's coming in the best interest of the buyer. It's not really trying to be territorial. And I think when you think about partnerships, it's really important that the lens is on that kind of final thing you're trying to achieve, which is creating an opportunity for a lower income household to achieve ownership. And in a way that's as minimally painful as possible, because we all have people we need to answer to, and how do we do that in the best way possible that doesn't entrench a buyer through multiple different processes. And that's not easy. It's definitely not easy, because we all have requirements that we need to adapt to. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm looking to Portia because we've had the most recent conversation.
Yeah, I was just about to say, for us, it's probably not that robust, but what it is we say, hey, this is what we asked for. This is what the city of Minneapolis asks us for.
What we need.
From you, get what you got, but then also can we, if they don't give you this information, this is the information we will ask for.
Yeah.
So that we're not, because we have a whole, like if they had to do us and the city of Minneapolis and land, like people wouldn't probably buy these houses.
They're like, enough, you're in my business, way too much.
So it's but it helped us to really look at our process and say, why do we ask for this? Because we're a big organization, we've been doing this for a long time. So some stuff we just do autopilot, we just ask everybody for the same thing, but then it's like, do we really need that? Probably not. So it's more of a learning situation for us too, but I think our biggest thing is we want the client or the home buyer to have the path of least resistance, because there's a lot of resistance in all of our processes.
Yes.
So we're really working hard to help with that. So partnership may be paying along, but we're trying to make it as painless. I am trying to make it as painless as possible.
And I think what's really important is making sure that we have the document that allows us to share the information.
Yes.
Because then we can take on some of that responsibility to say, we know what Habitat needs. We've collected 90% of that, and we've got the sign off to say we can share that with Habitat. Then we can send a packet over to say, hey, this person's coming through, they're interested in Harrison townhomes. They've done this, 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 and this. Everything's attached. Let us know if we've missed something. And we've talked now, Portia's patiently waiting for a response to her email from me. But
He's the one.
No, I was gonna say, Portia's patient. Chad, that's another conversation. No. And we banter, but you can see that this comes from relationship, right? But I think being able to say, let's just set up the monthly meeting to check in to see what units have been sold. Let's make sure we are communicating so that it is as painless as possible for the buyer that's coming through. So.
I did too want to say one thing. Chad, well, when you asked, I forgot who asked that question about our shift. We actually have a huge strategic initiative that is about generational wealth that's separate from all of this stuff. So we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, we still are doing, we talk out of both sides of the mouth. So we're talking about long-term affordability and generational wealth.
Right.
We have some very specific, which we can talk about at another time, strategic initiatives, especially when it comes to foundational Black households in the metro area. So we still have a large focus on that, but it's just kind of separate from this.
Yeah,
Both
yeah.
and.
Both and, yeah.
And it needs to be
Very small hole that we're trying to thread here of breaking the chain of our racial wealth gap in Minnesota, which everybody knows about, and preserving permanent affordability when those two are, for the most part, at odds.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a risk, at least in our communities in Virginia, where CLTs seem very new, it's very, it's like, you're taking what from people?
Mhm.
Right.
And it's like, no, we're making sure that these things, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
Quick question, so, sorry, so is Habitat writing all the mortgages then during this partnership? Or are you?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily,
Really?
no.
Aren't we
Yep.
writing all the mortgages?
No, you're not, Roxanne. No, don't worry about it. That's not on your plate.
So I think in most of the units that we have closed that have gone into a separate land trust entity, we have written the mortgage, we've been the lender, but there are a few where the buyer came through the land trust and already had a loan in hand. No, I mean, that, trying to think of homes in reach, they came to us and then got our mortgage.
Yeah. But we had the one
And
where
we
we,
sold, we
yeah.
had the one unit which we couldn't get sold internally for freaking forever, and so we ended up MLSing it. Had millions of dollars of city money on it, and was in this program, so it had to be land trusted. And so we hired Osborne, the City Lakes Realty, to sell it for us. Found the buyer, who came with their own financing. So just, we had 5 or 6 or however many entities interested in this, closed it.
Mhm.
And then the house, and then 2 weeks before we closed, the house was broken into and they cut the water line off.
Oh,
Water
yeah.
spewing all over it. So then we closed, and she had a deadline to close because she was going to lose her financing. And, oh my God.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to touch on in relation to the city, and I think Chad kind of talked about the journey through like the different markets and the things that have transpired over time. And for me, one of the turning points, I think, in relationship with the city was the neighborhood stabilization program funds. Because if any of you worked with NSP dollars, one of the first things they said was not to do a buyer-initiated program with those funds. That's all the City of Lakes had to offer during that down market. So much credit to the city, really fought to figure out with us how to do a buyer-initiated program with NSP funds. And the one of the key things was you had to buy a previously foreclosed home. And you had to do the rehab, and the NSP was set up in your traditional development, right? You buy the vacant house, you do the rehab, you sell it to a seller. Well, the buyer-driven program is the homeowner finds the house, moves in, and you do the rehab afterwards. And so when you think about foreclosed homes, not all of them are necessarily livable. So it took a lot to kind of figure out, how do we do this? And yet, at the same time, 3 rounds of NSP later, we have homes that homeowners probably never would have been able to buy except for the market values of those homes. And I know some of you have heard me say this a couple of times. So, but had it been the city to just say, you know what, you guys don't fit, we're not going to try to figure out how to work through this with you. We're going to go over here and work with 6 other developers that just do it like everybody else normally does it. We would have lost those opportunities, as would those individuals and those families. So it's also really important to, you push and you continue to push, but you do it in a way that builds that relationship and just doesn't get antagonistic. But that's where I think we really, then it's like, okay, how else can we use funding? How else can we apply this? And I'm just gonna give a shout out to Roxanne, because Roxanne has gone to bat with HUD and everybody else to figure out how to use home dollars and consistently use home dollars in Minneapolis with the land trust. And so you also have to have a strong advocate that is willing to really go to task. I think 3 years to get this most recent plan approved for home. So this isn't, you know, for the faint of heart as well. But so I just want to kind of highlight the fact that what may not always seem like it's doable, I think together you can kind of figure out how to make it work, if you both are committed to the ultimate goal and mission. So, yes.
I have a question about, this has been really good and informative about the relationship with the CLT, the city, and Habitat. What other, if any, developers have you partnered with in different ways?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that different than this?
Sure. So, who haven't we partnered with? We have partnered with Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation, PRG, Habitat, Prima Land, which was a private developer, Urban Homeworks, Build Wealth. Who else am I forgetting?
Well, I owe you a list of for-profit
Yeah.
developers.
So there's a lot.
And don't know about yet.
So there's many more to come. But for example, the slide I showed with the condos, one of those was a private development. And we have 7 condos in a 35 unit where they are the land trust. And part of it, and I don't know if I refer to it correctly, but I refer to it as the city's previous quasi-inclusionary, where if you use city funding, you had to have a certain amount of units that were affordable.
Yeah.
And so that is where some of the projects came through, was they came to us to do the affordable units. We became responsible for the dollars. So we're responsible for all the resales of those condos, the resales of the townhomes that aren't the Habitat ones, like for example at Franklin. We have single-family homes that have come from private developers as well early on. Urban Homeworks, we've done the condo at 2750 Cedar. We did Project Reclaim, which was a contract for deed program that we did for about 10 years. We did 3 different rounds of that, and it was really trying to create a product where, coming out of the foreclosure, we knew there was a lot of households that couldn't qualify for mortgages, but we're still really wanting to get into home ownership, and not necessarily because of something they did wrong. It was just the nature of what happened in that period of time. So we came up with a contract for deed program where we did, I think, Jake or Shang, do you remember, like 30-some homes through that, single-family homes? Or 50? Yeah. And that was a situation where they would use city funds, rehab the vacant homes or the foreclosed homes, and then we would go into a contract for deed with the expectation in 2 to 4 years they would finance into a conventional mortgage. So there's been a lot of different ways that we've partnered. Most of the time there is city fund in those dollars as well as the county. But I think, I always say that this is a really powerful strategy to use for a community if you are willing to be flexible and adaptable. And that's not just staff level, that is all the way up to board level. I don't think we would have helped as many individuals and families that we have had we just been, we develop and we only develop. We only buy vacant homes, that's all we do. We only do new construction. So I think between Project Sustain Legacy, Project Reclaim, the buyer-driven, the developer partnerships, our own development, which, bless the city's heart again, they're like, hey, we got this house that nobody else will touch. Land Trust, we think you should do it in 2013. Because the neighborhood didn't.
Habitat's gotten a call like
Yeah.
that. Work a miracle, please.
Yeah, and and that was the first time we stepped in and bought a vacant home. And it was part of it was the neighborhood just didn't want another home demolished. But it was a home that had been damaged by the tornado. The roof was off, the tarp was on, had been on for several years. The floor was looked like you could surf on because it was all nothing but hardwood waved. And somewhere we have a film that was one of our homeowners at the time wanted to do a before and after. And as we were walking through, and some of you heard me say this yesterday, was he's like, this would make the greatest horror movie set, because everything was draped down, boarded up, and and now it's a beautiful home, and we took it on. I mean, part of that's probably just sheer naivety and maybe a little bit of ignorance about what we were getting into, but we made it work, and we kind of started that shift into being our own developer, but that hasn't stopped us from doing the developer partnerships because we have limited capacity on that side.
Can I just interject
Mhm.
and ask a question of Roxanne? You mentioned the list that you gotta get, Stacy. So, who are those for-profit developers that are partnering with you to do permanent affordability, and are they, kind of what rate are they choosing, the land trust model versus the city model?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chad.
Mm-hmm.
Since we did the program changes in 2020 that I talked about, one of the key shifts that's happened is now we're doing much more homeownership projects. We went from doing about 20 to 25 a year to now we're doing 100 a year. And we went from doing about 20% through a land trust model, and now we're doing more like 60%, which is like really exciting. Through our program, 70% of the developers are BIPOC-led, for-profit developers that are dedicated to trying to create affordable homeownership and wealth-building opportunities within the city. So it's kind of a long list that I owe you, Stacy, of roughly like 20 to 25 different developers that are choosing perpetual affordability as their sale method. And some of that's because we're requiring it. Outside of North Minneapolis, where we have a requirement that the city property that we own is perpetually affordable. Within North, we give an option either way because of the effects of the tornado, because of the effects of redlining, because of the effects of the foreclosure crisis, where over 300 of the properties we own are all concentrated in North. And if all of those were perpetually affordable, it would be too much concentration, frankly, of perpetually affordable homes. Generally speaking, most people are choosing the CLT model when they're coming through, but there are some exceptions. I'd say it's about 15% that are choosing the city's perpetually affordable 2% model. And the reason that we created that 2% model is 2.5%. The reason we created that model is because one of the things that we heard during the engagement process that we did for our changes that we adopted in 2020 was that the concept of a land trust is there's aversion to that in some communities. The concept of someone else owning the land that your home is on. There's just some really extreme aversion to that concept in some communities, particularly in African American and Native communities where land ownership has a really significant meaning. And so our thinking was let's have something that's a complement, not necessarily something that's in competition, but something that's a complement that can include those communities that won't move forward with the land trust.
And you're doing that through a deed restriction.
Yep.
Not
Yep.
ground lease.
Yep.
I think there was someone behind first, Elvin, and then we'd come to you. Yeah, that's you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Going to when you collaborate with Habitat or other developers, to what extent is the CLT involved in, meetings during the development process around construction or things like that?
You don't read it.
Well, I think from the habitat, and then I'll touch base on kind of beyond habitat relationships, so,
Yeah.
yep.
So where we have had an intimate relationship is at Harrison Town Hall so far. And so Jeff Washburn, who was the ED at City Lakes up until recently, was in all the meetings. With neighborhood organization, funders, many of the design meetings, maybe not all the design meetings, but we have a pretty rigid and specific scope or finish spec, interior and exterior. That's different than CLTs. So we wanted, because of the partnership, to make sure that we were kind of bridging that gap as well. Not a huge gap by any stretch of the imagination, but in anticipation of marketing to both pipelines of clients, wanted to make sure we had meshed those. So there was lots of conversation about that. And then once we got to bidding, site work, and then bidding out the buildings and being under construction, you guys haven't participated so much, but we're just kind of running with that. But then once we get to marketing, which we're really ramping up right now, and the sales, then we'll be back conversing frequently every day.
And part of that comes with, some of this has to have a bit of trust on both sides, right? Frankly, we don't have the capacity to be like, oh, hey, what are you guys, what are you doing this week? In the fact that we just need to know that the project's moving forward. What we did learn after some of the early condo projects in particular is that we really needed to have a framework, because we get a lot of calls. And we get a lot of calls about I wouldn't say so much now, but there was a period of time where it was like, we're gonna build a condo, we want someone to be land trust, what does it take? And our project development committee came up with a developer partner policy in 2015 or 2017. We really looked at what worked well in the process with both private and not-for-profit developers and came up with a framework, which we are actually now reviewing because it was very directed towards multifamily. So we built in things such as, land trust units have to be scattered throughout the building. You can't just put land trusts in one corner of the building and they're all one bedrooms, right? You have to have a representative percentage. If you have 35 units, then we want at least 1 or 2 bedrooms. We want 1 or 2 one bedrooms. Finishes all have to be the same, which I find, as I've had conversations around the country with other land trusts, they're like, oh, well, they wanted to do like a lesser, the market rates had the stainless steel and the land trusts were gonna get white refrigerators or something like that. And it's like, no, that all has to be the same. There shouldn't be any difference between the units. The other thing that we really looked at was the HOA, or the homeowners association. And having really encountered some, lack of a better word, dysfunctional HOAs that have resulted in some pretty tough situations for homeowners in those units. We now, like the 628, even though we're in ownership in a little different position, our declaration and the bylaws will say that the land trust has a membership on the HOA at all times. And that is something we wrote into our developer policy in any multifamily moving forward. We also wanted to have a recognition of the fact of, while we may not have taken a financial risk or a huge one during the development of a project, we are taking the financial risk for the next 99 plus years, and thought that that had some value in that stewardship capacity. So we have also built in some developer fee requirements that aren't huge, but they're at least a recognition of the fact that we are taking on the longer term risk of being in ownership of land, being in ownership of the units, and stewarding the affordability. Because essentially we are on the hook for the funds that the city and the county have brought forward if we don't keep those homes affordable to who we say they're supposed to be affordable to. So that policy has been really helpful when a developer calls and says, in particular, we want to do a multifamily. I'm like, here's the developer policy. We can get you in front of the project development committee, because if it's a project outside of anything we would normally do, it goes in front of that committee for evaluation. And so it's just helped, some developers are like, yeah, no, we're good. We'll go over here, right? But then at least if they're coming in, they know what our expectations are, and we're not surprising them with anything. They can actually take it and evaluate it and decide if they want to move forward. And then if we are interested in doing the project, then that's where we're really going to frame out, is the land trust bringing funds? Are we going to be responsible for raising those funds? What are those price points? How much do we have to raise? What does that all look like?
To build off of what Staci just framed, effectively all of those requirements that Staci just talked about are what we've incorporated into our RFP process for Minneapolis Homes. And so unlike just a developer approaching a land trust outside of a city process, if someone's coming through a city process, we're reinforcing all of those expectations and framing, like, if you're gonna work in partnership with us, then we're expecting you to do a land trust project in this way.
There's something else I was going to say. It just flew out of my mind. Sorry. It'll come back as we talk. Yeah.
Other thing, another vein of conversation that we had to do with Harrison is the legal side. So City of Lakes bought that property, and so we're building on their property, which is a new situation for us. And so we have had to spend quite a bit of time and dollars on setting up that legal arrangement and through a development agreement, and we have a construction ground lease, so we're effectively leasing the ground right now in order to build the units. And that has to convert on a unit by unit basis to permanent ground lease. And like $500 an hour attorneys, they didn't know the answer right away. So that's been a pain. And then we've got to write the HOA docs with the land trust. The land trust owning all the land, the unit land and the outlot land, which is a different situation than most HOAs. One great thing is that City of Lakes is signing up to be the property management company for the HOA, so we don't have to go find another property management company, which is in our market a challenge to do for small townhome or HOA projects.
And to build off of what Chad framed, the city also has had to have a lot of patience and be open to changing through the Harrison Townhomes project. We had the name change and had to go through a whole council action process because of that. We had to be very patient with our money. Usually we expect that projects start within a year, and I think our first money went in 2018 for the Harrison
Sounds
Townhomes.
about right. Something happened in the interim. It wasn't all our fault.
Part of which was COVID, but other things happened. But
Well, and frankly, because of COVID and the impact that happened in the construction market, construction prices went up 35%. We had to come in with extra money in order to make sure that
Twice.
the project could move forward. Yes. Yes.
yeah.
Yes, twice. And we don't usually do that, so that was hard, but it was worth it at the end of the day. I think the thing that I would hope all of you walk away with is the hard is worth it, because you learn from each other through the act of collaborating. You deepen the relationships within community, and you're able to achieve something that wouldn't be possible without the partnership.
Yes.
Maybe Chad, what advice would you give both of us that have not had a partnership, say, with Habitat yet, to approach it moving forward? I mean, I think the one item that I just have heard the last 2 days is that your mortgage rates are better. So I mean, I take it some of the land trust marriages have been because of you seem to have access to funds differently than, and what advice would you give, say, the smaller land trusts? I mean,
Yeah, so a smaller land trust dealing with a smaller habitat. So I know Twin Cities Habitat, which means I know one habitat well, right? I don't know all the others. But my perspective or perception of them is that they are more focused on the wealth creation side of the coin. Small affiliates don't use nearly as much public funding, so they don't have public funders telling them they want permanent affordability. Their private funders have been comfortable with wealth creation for as long as that affiliate's been around. Their volunteers are comfortable, and they're motivated by that, you know, they're making this unit very, very affordable for a low-income family, and that family is gonna generate significant wealth out of that property. They view that as a good thing. And they don't do equity sharing. They don't have buyback provisions, and they don't buy back units. So the land trust concept is a little foreign to them at this point. I think the pitch has to be that we can create units that aren't gonna get created by either of us if we partner. So we have to kind of really clearly articulate the value that each entity brings to the equation. The synergy, as much as I hate to use that word, that is gonna create something that wouldn't happen otherwise. And so, you know, if you can bring more money to the table, and but it means that there has to be permanent affordability, and they can bring the efficiency of the volunteer model. There is a bit of a match made in heaven there, but it is, you know, kind of a mental shift for a lot of affiliates. Any other have folks have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would add to that what you're saying is correct, but Habitat International has got currently has a working discussion about what CLTs are, how they bring that affordability to us. So it's something that International is releasing to all of the affiliates to understand in that knowledge.
And I would encourage from the land trust perspective is what is your message to developers, and how do you educate developers on the model? And we run into this quite a bit, as Roxanne had shared. There's a number of new developers that are coming through with the Minneapolis homes and working with either the perpetual affordable or the land trust, and several discussions of trying to help understand, especially the matrix the city has. They have to kind of satisfy two levels. There's a maximum purchase price, but that purchase price also has to be 20% below what the estimated market value of the home is. And there's been many conversations with developers who are like, well, but I can sell it for this, and they've got their pro formas all figured out, but it's not 20% of that max. And now you start talking about leasehold calculations, and if it's a private developer, we've had a number of conversations, and they're like, wait, what? You're selling it for $200 and it cost us $400 to build, and I can only sell it for $300, and where does all this money come from? It's like, well, let us worry about the $300 to the $200. You figure out how to do the $300 to the $400 so that you're made out whole. But it's a bad business model from the land trust perspective and from a private developer. So it's really important that if somebody's wanting to partner with you, it's not just because you have funds to bring.
Yeah.
They really have to understand what this all means and how it's going to work. And I will say probably out of 10 conversations with private developers in particular, there may be one that moves forward, because it just doesn't, it's like, it's not gonna work. It doesn't make sense to us. And it's not so much making sense, but it just doesn't work. The math doesn't work. So that's the responsibility I see on the land trust piece when you're starting to have conversation, is know what the funding source is, know what those requirements are, how can you communicate what your role is, and then what does it mean to actually do this? And that's one of the conversations we're having now when we market, is what do we, from the land trust perspective, want to see on the marketing, even though we technically can't be the lead marketer in the Harrison townhomes. But we want to make sure people understand it's going to be land trust, that it will be income restricted, it will be resale restricted as they start down that path, so there isn't that rude awakening 6 steps into the process that they feel like maybe a little bait and switch or somebody didn't disclose something. You always want to start out as best foot possible with your buyers, and that's with disclosing throughout the whole process. Other questions? Otherwise, I got a couple more. Maybe I switched them up. Maybe you guys don't know what I'm going to ask you now. Yes, Alvin.
Speak to some of the challenges that around shifting, lowering the line, how you thought through that.
It was really horrible. So when we went through all of the program changes that I talked about in 2020, it meant that we had to go to HUD and change our resale and recapture policy, because we wanted to be, effectively the shift that we did is, before we had really a box that every developer had to fit into in order to receive funding from the city. And it was just one box. We gave you $80,000 to do a home, and that was kind of it. And the shift that we did in 2020 was to say, well, now we're going to have 20 boxes. And now we're going to have all of these different pathways. And our partners at HUD were very confused by that shift. At first, when we were trying to reframe our resale recapture policies, we were trying to frame so that we could have both. Because in our program, we have both. We allow people, when there's less than 15% of home's value that's needed for affordability gap, which is primarily true in North Minneapolis, where prices are lower, then we sell properties through recapture, and we have that option. In the rest of the city, where home prices are much higher, we're doing 20% of a home's value or much more. Sometimes we're doing 50% or 60%. And in those cases, we're doing perpetual affordability. So originally we started framing to HUD, hey, we're gonna do both of these things. Isn't this great? And they said, no, it is not. You cannot do that. And I had to go through HUD regional, I had to go through HUD national, I had to get technical assistance. And then after that first round of technical assistance, they still didn't approve our policy. So then I went through another round of technical assistance with a different provider. And the end result, originally what I was trying to achieve is having home as a flexible source that could be used throughout our program. As a result of all of that engagement over the course of 3 years, it was 3 years. Like, it was horrible. Now it's very narrow. Now, effectively, we have a resale policy where we say our target home buyer is 30% to 80% AMI through City of Lakes Community Land Trust, and through that model. And we're not doing anything else with home dollars. We're using local dollars, or we're using state dollars when we're doing a recapture concept. Because home is really challenging, it turns out, at the end of the day. And one of the deepest frustrations that I had through that process, I'm like having trauma response right now.
Let it all out.
One of the deepest frustrations was we literally were told multiple times, like, oh, just look at this exhibit and then like work through this exhibit in order to make sure your policy is in compliance. And so we did that, and it still wasn't approved. And we had to have multiple conversations with HUD National in order to get to the point of, okay, this is good enough. And it ended up being just a 2-page policy at the end of the day. 3 years to fight over 2 pages. So don't learn from my example. Hopefully it's not that painful for anyone else. I would say if you are approaching changing your consolidated plan, trying to look at what other cities have done is going to be a smart strategy. To say, oh, I'm adopting something that Minneapolis did already on their resale policy. We're just expanding it to Carver County.
Other questions? We got a few more minutes. me see what else I had for you.
Oh, there's one.
Oh, there's, go ahead.
So, I was just, was saying that you hope you mostly by that, your husband. What's the plan with the CLT? Will Habitat still, who's in the first graders, I'm looking at first graders, people in the city, actually for the city and the CLT and Habitat.
Yeah, so, we used to do first right of refusal a long time ago. We switched to a purchase option, a little more, straightforward. But we are relinquishing that, to the land trust. And kind of turning over the long-term stewardship to the land trust to deal with.
All right, so Roxanne and Chad, maybe is kind of a, what are 3 things you can consider to be critical components of a successful, effective partnership?
Clarity of roles, a written agreement,
You wrote it down.
follow through by both parties, and give and take and a commitment to collaborate.
Well, will you say those again, please?
Yeah.
Sure. Clarity of roles,
Mhm.
written agreement, follow through by both parties, give and take, and a commitment to collaborate.
I guess what I would add for the developer government relationship is saying yes for the developer. Just say yes. Can't always do that, but if you do that more often than not, then when you need to say no, they will hear it better. And then, if you're a yes organization for them, then they're gonna come to you with, sometimes they're horrific problem properties, but sometimes they're a good project. And they wouldn't come to you if you were always saying no, which was Twin Cities Habitat was very much, for many, many years, too many years, no, we wanna do it our way organization. And finally, we broke out of that, and now we do more, we get more money from the city. Roxanne likes me instead of hates me. And for working with a land trust, yeah, I think just the critical thing that has become very apparent over the last couple of years is just transparency. You have to be willing to just open up everything, and it's not gonna hurt you. The land trust knowing your insides, your books, and your processes is not gonna hurt you. It's only gonna help the families, which is what we want.
I was just thinking when you were talking, it was interesting because, especially the yes and no, because I think we're talking about kind of the financing, but when you think about developing and you think about partnerships, especially in with public entities, I was just thinking about how deep those partnerships go, because we have construction managers, we have regulatory services, and a few years ago, I used to get so uptight when we got a special assessment, right? We'd buy a property, it had been held by the county or the city for 10 years. Soon as the land trust took ownership, it's like, oh, this is a nuisance property. It's like, but half of these assessments are when we weren't in ownership. And I just took a deep breath one day and I was like, okay, let's figure out how we solve this. And it was reaching out to regulatory, figuring out who the person was to talk to, especially in situations where we assisted existing homeowners. We really needed some patience from the regulatory side to give us a chance to make some corrections. And it was a phone call and said, you know what, you've helped me out in these other situations. Can I just get together with your inspectors? Because I want you to understand what situation the land trust is faced with, and to give us a call so we don't racking up more fees that doesn't allow us to do the rehab we need to do because we're paying the city because somebody went out and said there wasn't address numbers on the door. We know there's not address numbers on the door, but we have a bipolar schizophrenic who doesn't take his medications, who doesn't want us anywhere near his property half the time, and we put up numbers and he takes them off. We just need to figure out how to work with you, but you need to understand we're not just sitting over here going, well, we don't want numbers on our house.
Right.
It's a deeper conversation, and that is, it's been really powerful because we do now get calls from the inspectors when they know that we own a property. They're not sending out someone and charging us $250 to pick up tree branches. they give us a chance to send somebody out on our side to do that. So I think when you think about partnerships, it's not just Chad and I talking. It wasn't just my former colleague and Chad talking. Noah says, Staci, can you come and look at a door and let me know if this is going to be okay and if this meets land trust standards? And, there's super depth at the city that we have conversation. Portia and I have been in conversation, bringing in Shang from a homeowner, Jake so you have to figure out who all needs to be connected in those partnerships. It may start with Chad, Jeff, or I, but eventually it's going to trickle down into multiple layers and making sure that you're developing those relationships at all those layers as well.
Can I pick on you, Jessica? Any thoughts on the Roseville relationship?
Yeah, I think to add to what's already been mentioned, I would underscore those things and then say, adaptability and flexibility. So I think when we first started the partnership Chad just mentioned with the city of Roseville, we had goals, we had metrics, we had ideas in mind of how we would execute. That's changed as we've encountered barriers, as we've encountered the market and things like that. So ability to be flexible if we're still meeting the intent, we're still meeting the goals. Ability within all the partnerships, all the groups involved to be flexible, to be able to adapt, and approach maybe some of those situations with innovation or a new way of looking at it. And then I would also say centering the client. So again, we're all in this to the goal of affordable homeownership, being families in homes. And so, to continue to go back to that centering of the mission, centering of the goal. Let's think about how we make decisions where we can. Let's keep in mind kind of the objective.
Any other thoughts? Any other comments that you all wanted to share? That you don't feel like we've touched on?
Looking at my notes, I think I said all the things.
Chad, anything?
I think I've said all the things.
Wow, what a...
Ooh, I
Oh,
got
you-
one more.
Okay,
got
and then
one
I
more.
also, I did want to touch on the lobbying that the gentleman asked about too. Yeah.
So Staci kind of alluded to some partnerships that went bad, and we're starting to really dig into that, particularly on larger condo developments. The city did several different projects in the 2000s, generally speaking, when there used to be a condo market. And out of all of the projects that we've done, about half of them are in trouble right now. So we're trying to look at that and say, what can we learn? Especially because we have this new inclusionary housing policy where we want to see multi-unit condos happen again in the city. None of them are happening yet, but one day they will. And especially as we're, yes.
Yeah, there is one, Roxanne.
There is one. Yes, there is one, and there's a couple more on the way. But there aren't many that are happening, and we need to learn from those past mistakes in order to move forward better in the future. So one of the main things that we're really seeing is in condo developments, we as a city need to have some better compliance monitoring and stay at the table rather than treating them like homeownership projects that are more conventional, where you just sell to the home buyer and then walk away and everything is done. When there's a commitment to affordability, government funders need to stay at the table, and so do everyone else who's committed to monitoring that affordability over time.
Is that what you mean by they're in trouble now? When you say they're in trouble, you mean in terms of affordability or in terms of?
In the case of all of the ones that are in trouble, there's major challenges with reserves not being capitalized sufficiently to make any improvements or to manage churns. And as a result, there are too many vacant units, and they're facing foreclosure.
Yeah, and some have major construction defects that are resulting in significant potential special assessments. So they are being added on to that monthly cost already. and potentially, even for market rate, are potentially becoming unaffordable.
Yep.
So from a sustainable perspective. Real quick, let's touch on the lobbying piece.
Yeah,
Oh, did you have?
One other thing I would just toss out, a random thought, I guess. If you're in Minnesota, deed restrictions have been limited to 30 years up until this last session, when municipally imposed affordability deed restriction is exempt from that limitation. So that's good news for Roxanne's program. And so if you are a land trust that is willing to administer a long-term, effectively permanent deed restriction for another developer, in particular a habitat, that habitat may be more amenable to a deed restriction type of permanent affordability, because it doesn't sever the land. And just presents less of, maybe, excuse me, less of a marketing hurdle for that habitat. And then on the lobbying question, yes, we have two, we're a big organization, so we have two full-time, now two still. I think we're hiring another one now. Hiring a third, lobbying people on staff, and then we also contract with lobbyists at the Capitol.
If you think about the early days, what were some of the first things that you probably tried to get passed? I mean, that's the right way.
Well, I think it's always been about money, right? It's like,
Yes.
and I think some dedicated sources, yeah.
What's your ask?
Yeah, I don't do that because I don't have the patience for politics. I've been very candid about that, and fortunately, my former colleague was really good at it. Because I just don't. I don't have the patience to do the dance to make somebody feel good about.
Just do the right thing.
Just do, yeah. It's like I don't want to sit here and have to convince you to have a conscience and have a heart. So I think I'm not the person to ask, but there are some really great coalitions, and it's really I think trying to carve out for ownership, in particular affordable ownership. There's been some trying to have some dedicated sources that continue to contribute. I'm trying to think what else that has been lobbied for recently.
The first generation DPA.
The first generation down payment assistance, there's the deed tax, there's a reduction in the assessment on property taxes.
There's more investment in ownership housing, period.
Yep.
And the stabilization funds that just came through that
Yep.
can allow for stabilizing ownership housing in addition to rental was like a really big one.
Mm-hmm.
I think so the city has its own like lobbying, but then I, through my involvement through the Minnesota Homeownership Center, am able to advocate for more change than I could just through the city. Like the city has its process and it can be painful. But through some regional roundtables, it's possible to advocate for like what I as a person actually want instead of I as a city representative. And a lot of the legislative wins that happen, like I feel I was able to contribute to because I'm part of those regional roundtables. Mm-hmm. And Minnesota Homeownership Center shares their lobbyists with Habitat and was able to carry some pretty exciting work in the last legislative session. Mm-hmm. So that's why I give my time to things like the MCCD coalition that's happening right now, because I have expertise to offer and I can't necessarily, like, convincing the city to take positions is hard.
Yeah. And just like with all of this, it's a journey. Yeah, it's not going to be 1 year we get an ear of a particular legislature doesn't mean you're going to get the bill passed. And so I think it's been a lot of decades of work and bringing this forward and trying to figure out what resonates with both sides, what matters to them. So I think it's really understanding the climate at the legislature and to be able to have people that are focused on that and can build those relationships is critical. Whether that be through coalitions or direct lobbyists, but yeah. We are at time, but I think there's one more question. Nope.